Okay.
Fans, Pete here from the Lasser Cast, where we talk about all of your favorite horror movies and TV shows and just anything that's coming out on Shudder. I am here with my good friend and co-host, Mr. Dr. Zayas God. Danny, I feel like I see you like every day now in October.
I, we, you know, we were talking with somebody last night, and we said it's a wonderful time of the year, but it's also a very tiring time of the year for horror
Yeah.
fans. It does not feel like we have any time to breathe. I did something I very rarely do last night, and that is I actually had movie tickets. I got a refund for them, and I went to bed early because
Oh,
I was burnt out last night. Um, and it's not going to get any easier on us.
no.
I'm recording something later for tomorrow. I'm recording episode 2 of Chucky with a review of the Chucky panel from New York Comic Con.
Yes.
Friday is episode 3 of Queer for Fear on Shudder. We still have to talk about Hellraiser. Halloween Ends comes out tomorrow in theaters. Um, oh, yeah. And next week, I am going with some press passes to the Brooklyn Horror Film Festival. I'm going to at least 2 showings. Um, One of them is a movie directed by Joe Bagos, who did a couple movies that we've talked about: VFW
Oh, okay.
and Bliss, an insane vampire movie, that modern day vampire movie that was on Shudder, might still be there.
Mm.
And the other one I'm super looking forward to. It's a documentary called Living with Chucky, and it's directed by one of the special effects wizards who does the dolls, Tony
Mm,
Gardner, who actually
mm.
was killed on screen in Seed of Chucky. His
Oh, okay.
daughter made a documentary about growing up and basically being a part of the Chucky family and being on set from a young age with the Chucky doll and the filmmakers. And yeah, so I'm really excited for that. But yeah, it just doesn't stop, Pete.
And it's funny is that people are probably sitting there thinking like, well, what the fuck are they talking about right now? Especially if they're on our
I
podcast. Go ahead.
I this is the great this is the greatest tired feeling you could have. Like
Yes.
when I'm exhausted from like a long day of work and like my lessons didn't go well, or
Oh.
I have a like I just got off a Zoom meeting with
Mm.
after work for an hour, and I'm just like, ugh. But when I'm exhausted because I've watched too much horror and you and I have talked too much about horror, I'll plow through 99 times out of 100. So
Oh. Well, I don't think it's possible to talk too much about horror because that's what we're going to do today for an hour. We are going to be talking
let's
about
go.
Shudder's 101 scariest horror movie moments of all time, and we have made it all the way to lucky number 36. And the thing is, with this list, it's weird because I have not seen as many of these movies as you would think. This is another list where it's like, oh, I actually didn't see a good majority of these, but I did see lucky number 36, The Blair Witch Project. So, The Blair Witch Project came out just like you, Danny. I worked in a movie theater at one point in my life, and I remember sweeping up the aisles and stuff as the credits rolled for The Blair Witch, and I would always get creeped the fuck out. And I know that like there was always those rumors: is it real? Is it not real? I think pretty much from the get go, I knew that it wasn't real. I think that someone spoiled that for me, but I can understand why someone would think that Blair Witch was based on actual true found footage.
Yeah.
What'd you think of it?
I mean, it's the first movie that used viral marketing that I can remember. It's lucky it came out at the perfect time where the internet was just getting going, but not everybody was skilled in using search engines. Today, if you saw a trailer for something like that, within 35 seconds you'd have 12 websites telling you how fake it is and how they made every minute of it. Back in 1999, there were actually people who went into the movie theater like, is this like, what is this? I actually saw this in a movie theater that doesn't exist anymore. The Kings Plaza Mall, Kings Plaza
Yeah.
movie theater. This might have been the last movie I saw there before it closed down and they got rid of it. I remember this movie being polarizing when I first saw it. I remember the movie ended, and the scene that they picked is that final
Right.
shot of the movie,
Right.
which I remember in the theater going, oh shit.
Yeah.
When you see the guy facing the wall in the basement, and then the camera hits the floor and the movie ends, there were audibly a lot of people in that movie theater as I was getting up to leave who were going, what the fuck was that?
Yeah.
Like, what kind of stupid? And I remember like looking over at like a couple like dude bros and going, don't you remember the guy earlier in the movie said that the Blair Witch made somebody stare at the wall before they killed the other person? And the guy was like, oh, I don't remember. I don't know. That was stupid. I was like, all right, well, I loved it. And I feel like this is one of those movies that because, and they bring this up, it kind of helped launch a resurgence in found footage that people look back at this today who've never seen it, and it doesn't hold up for new viewers. Whereas this is a movie very much of its time, and because we saw this movie maybe before we were skilled internet users and before everybody had a smartphone, before smartphones ever existed,
Right.
It had a special place. It holds a special place in my heart. I feel like it might not be the greatest horror movie of all time, but it's one of the most historically and culturally important. And I think the ending is great. I really do. I think it's a great, shocking horror ending.
Yes, I totally agree. One thing that they're going to mention later in this episode is the idea of the audience kind of reacting to things at different times. Like some people are onto it, and some people it takes them a little longer to get it. And I think that when you're like us, where you've just consumed so much horror media, you're kind of looking for certain things, and you kind of pick up on things a little bit quicker than the average bear. And I think that that's kind of what you're talking about with this experience of like, what was that? Oh, he's looking at the wall. It's that wall, the shot of the guy looking at the wall at the very end. It's a good example of how horror can be made for so cheap and make so much money. And they even talk about that in this episode too, about the idea of like horror is just basically it's very easy to make a horror movie as compared to other types of movies. You know, you're able to just make them so much easier and with so much money, but it still gets that effect with people. And yeah, I totally agree that this movie had an impact when it came out. It had an impact on me. It scared the shit out of me. And it just reminds me of that time of being like 16 years old when it came out. I was like 16, 17. It came out in 1999. There's actually the movie that's number 34 on the list came out around the same time too, because I was still working in the movie theater then. But before we get to number 34, which is The Sixth Sense, I wanted to talk about Paranormal Activity, which is number 35. So they did their thing where they sandwich movies together, where it's like, oh, these two are the same.
They
And
do
so
it again later. It's weird, you know. I don't mind it. I feel like they're almost with this series, they're kind of, yes, it's a countdown, but I don't necessarily think the conceit of we're putting these in order of the scariest moments ever. I think they're kind of they're giving away that conceit and basically saying, if you like this scary moment in this movie, well, then you'll also love this scary moment from this movie. And they do that later on, and we'll get to those scenes later on. They do it a few times, actually, and they've been doing it since the beginning of the list.
yeah.
And I think that's maybe why, we have, and some of the comments on Shudder have been like, oh, how come this movie's not lower down? Well, because it fit better with the conversation that's going on. So I've kind of come around on the whole, oh, they're counting down scariest of all time, because I feel like the episodes flow better as a conversation when you're kind of pooling the movies together. So like you said, Paranormal Activity, what better movie to jump off of than Blair Witch to get to Paranormal Activity? And yeah, this was another one where I remember, this was the first movie I remember where the commercials for this movie had no shots of the movie. It was just shots of the crowds watching the movie.
Yes,
And
yes.
I'm really shocked that they went. I thought they were going to be like very specific and pick the scene where she gets dragged out of bed. But the scene they picked is actually the scene I would have picked. It's the scene where Katie, who's been haunted by this spirit the whole movie, demonic force, whatever it is, the camera, you see the time in the corner. And she just gets up and she stands over Mika, the worst boyfriend in movie history. And she just stares straight at him, shaking a little bit. And the clock speeds up and you're going like 1:30 in the morning, 2:30 in the morning, 3:30. She stands there for hours. And Athena always yells at me because and maybe it's because I'm a horror fan, but I get jump scared all the time in my house by the dumbest things. Like I'll go in the kitchen, and if I'm like in the middle of making dinner and somebody walks towards the kitchen door, and I don't catch them and I notice them out of the peripheral vision, I'll just go like, huh? And then like Athena will be like, what are you doing? Like, what? I didn't even like jump. I just appeared in the kitchen. And it, like stuff like that scares me. And they make a reference to like, what if you woke up in the middle of the night and your partner is just standing right there? I would have a freaking heart attack.
Oh yeah, I think I probably would murder Sherry. Honestly, it's funny because she says to me, because I think that I sometimes have night terrors and stuff because I'll wake up. Actually, last night even I woke up and I was like, "Oh, I think you were killing someone." I said to her, like I was having a nightmare of Sherry killing someone, and I think it's just because I've been consuming so much horror recently, and that is what Paranormal Activity kind of captures, is that feeling of like, who am I living with? You know, one of the scariest things, and they do capitalize on it in some horror movies, but there's the idea of like the nanny cam and like watching footage of, oh, someone is near my baby, you know, my baby is, you know, in danger. And there's that idea of like, this is what's going on when you're not watching. This is what is going on when you're asleep. And Paranormal Activity just like captures that so well.
Yeah.
It's funny because on Half in the Bag, you know, on Red Letter Media, they kind of joke about how like Paranormal Activity is all about just like cabinets opening up and just creaky noises and stuff. But it's done to such an extent, just like the Blair Witch Project, where your imagination is filling in all the gaps and just therefore making it so much scarier. And like one point that they really haven't made that much in this series, they have made it a few times, but it's the idea of like what you don't see that is scarier than what you actually do see, right? And so I think that that's like Paranormal Activity to a T. It's like what you don't see, and so you're stressing yourself out. The next one on our list, because one thing is I want to like go through this list kind of quickly because Danny actually has his own predictions of what are in the remaining two episodes of this show. So if we get through these quickly, then Danny can go through his predictive list. And then also one other thing too, I always wait till the very end to say like and subscribe. But if you guys want to, please subscribe to our channel because we got just horror content coming out the asshole. You
And
know?
speaking of the horror content we have, I was looking at the list and going, oh, I'll segue this in later, but we don't get to an 80s horror movie until the very last one of this entry. But speaking of 80s horror, we did interview friend of the channel, David Weiner, last night. And that interview is going to be going up on our channel very, very soon. And we talked about another upcoming 4 to 5 hour horror documentary, In Search of Darkness Part 3, where he goes into the deepest of deep dives into what the remnants of 80s horror. I can't wait for that, and we had a great talk with him last night. So if you like the In Search of Darkness documentaries, or In Search of Tomorrow, the sci-fi documentary all about 80s sci-fi. Stay tuned to our channel. We're going to have another near hour-long interview with him up on the channel very soon.
Yep.
I'm looking at the list. I'm like, I'll shoehorn this in when we get to an 80s movie. And I'm like, shit, the last one is the only... I was like, I'll forget by that point. So, all right, let's keep going.
Good job shoehorning, my man. And so we are up to The Sixth Sense, which, sad to say, the spoiler, this is one of the most like, oh my God, the twist ending of this movie. That's what everyone always talks about. And the twist ending was actually spoiled for me. I worked in a movie theater, like I said, and there's this girl that I was interested in, and she was having a conversation about it, and she just spoiled the fucking ending of this movie for me. It was great.
So it's funny you say that, because Charlotte was sitting with me this morning before we left for school and work. And I was sitting there and I was like, I don't think you should watch this part. And she's like, why? I'm like, because you haven't seen this movie and I don't want them to spoil it. And thank God they didn't come straight out and spoil the ending on this episode.
Right.
So she's good to go for this episode. I actually had the ending of another classic ending. It's not a horror movie, but The Usual Suspects.
Oh.
My dad gave me the, oh my God, you're going to love this movie. It's so great, comma, when you find out blank is the best. And I'm like, but what? I was like 13, and I think he like just was excited for me to watch like a cool movie.
Right.
But yeah, the scene here, again, another classic scene. Haley Joel Osment in the middle of the night in the tent, and the way the camera pans down on Misha Barton, like with spewing vomit out of her mouth. And that's not only is that the first, probably the scariest moment in the movie, but it's also the most pivotal moment, because that's when you start to realize that the ghosts are not after him, they need him. And it kind of changes the plot of the movie going into the second half, and of course into the big reveal at the ending. I think The Sixth Sense is one of the greatest debut movies for a horror director, and we can sit here and argue and talk about the rest of Shyamalan's work and the very good highs and the very low lows and everything in the middle. Yes. But I don't think he's ever reached the highs of this movie since then.
Yes, completely agree. It kind of makes me wonder what was going on behind the scenes, like what is different from The Sixth Sense from the rest of his movies, because I think he has an excellent eye for his films. I think a lot of his films look beautiful. It's just a lot of times it's with the dialogue and stuff that's where it gets kind of weird and awkward. But speaking of movies that look beautiful, let's segue to number 33, Let the Right One In. So, by the way, I think, I was trying to keep track of like what I have seen and what I have not. I have seen Blair Witch, I've seen Paranormal Activity, The Sixth Sense, and I have seen Let the Right One In as well. And I actually really loved it a lot when I saw it.
Yeah.
I haven't seen the remake of, it's like Let Me In, right?
Yeah, and I actually heard that that's really good, and they're making a new Let the Right One In. I don't know if it's a movie or a series, though.
Right.
But I'm interested in it. But I love this movie. This is, whenever I talk about, and I talk about it a lot, my love of foreign horror, this is always one of my go-to examples of something so simple, but that's so effective. And if you haven't seen it, this is a Scandinavian vampire movie. And the vampire is a little girl. And she befriends this like bullied young boy, and they have this incredible friendship. They call it a romance, but it's not really. But it's more about like love, that they love each other kind of in like a non-conditional way. And the scene, the first time I saw this scene, the pool scene, it's one of the most beautifully shocking scenes. And if you haven't seen it, you should definitely go out and seek this movie out. But the boy is being bullied, and he's being basically drowned in a community pool. And all of a sudden, you just hear the camera is on him being held underwater. And all you see is that perspective. And then you start to see feet being dragged through the water. And then a head falls in the water. and then the arm holding him down falls off and it's cut off at the elbow, and it's just like, what the, and then you realize that this vampire girl has come and saved him, and it's this incredible moment where they make the point of like, you're kind of rooting for these kids to die, but at the same time they're just kind of asshole kids, and it really has that like juxtaposition in your mind of, haha, the bad guys got it, but ooh, they're really young, and like they might have been able to be redeemed as humans, but oh well, they're dead now.
They're slaughtered.
It's a great movie. It's a gorgeous film. It's a foreign film. If you could read, you could watch foreign horror. So if anybody out there is skeptical about it, check it out. It's fantastic.
Yeah. For Let the Right One In, it kind of makes me think there's a lot of movies from that time period. It's like just right before I moved to Texas. Like it's like 13 or 14, maybe even 15 years ago when it came out. And I feel like there was a lot of horror around that time that was really standing out. Like that's sort of like that mid 2000s run. And what I was thinking when I was watching this episode has a lot of very recent horror. If you're considering that we're going back to like the days of like Nosferatu and the original Universal monsters, this episode has a lot of very modern movies. And I'm thinking that this is what probably makes this list so very different from that Bravo countdown that we keep referring to.
Yeah.
Because obviously time has passed and we almost have like another generation of horror fans since that list was made.
Yeah.
So once again, we have another movie, and this one is extremely modern. This movie came out and the Lasser cast existed.
This was actually number 33 on our list. On their list was number 1 on my personal top 10 of 2020. And I think that makes it the most modern film on this entire countdown so far, because Dr. Sleep was 2019.
Okay.
So it's The Invisible Man. Leigh Whannell's The Invisible Man. And this movie will always hold a special place in my heart. It was the last horror movie that I saw in theaters before theaters shut down.
Right.
And I remember thinking, I remember it's the last movie that I saw with a big crowd, because I took Charlotte to see Sonic the Hedgehog like mid-March, like the day before theaters closed. And there were like 2 other people in the theater. I think by that point, people were too scared to go anywhere.
Right.
And when I saw The Invisible Man that February, the theater was packed. And when this scene happened, it was one of the loudest gasp moments that I can remember in a theater. And that moment stuck with me. And we started this channel and we did that countdown of our top 10 of 2020. This was my personal number 1 because of that feeling that I remember of being in the theater for it. If you've seen The Invisible Man, Leigh Whannell's The Invisible Man, it's the restaurant scene. That should be all you need to know. But her sister is there. Elizabeth Moss is desperately trying to convince her sister that her ex-boyfriend is after her, even though basically imagine trying to convince your loved one, listen, I'm not crazy, but an invisible man is after me.
Right.
And in the middle of the dinner scene, Elizabeth Moss is just sitting there like, please listen to me. And like next to her over here, there's just a knife. And I remember sitting in the movie theater and like, it takes you a second and the camera lingers just enough where your eyes go from her to the knife. And then your brain starts to compute. She's not holding the knife. What the fuck? Oh, and her sister's throat gets slashed. People start screaming and the knife gets like thrust into her hand and she's stuck taking the blame for her own sister's death. It is one of the great, I don't even know, it's not a jump scare, but it's just, I would call it a gasp moment, a moment that made the audience like go, oh, like, and it was so good. We talked a lot about this on our channel. It's a very recent movie. I'm sure most of you, if you're watching, have seen this. So I think unless you have anything we could probably move on.
Well, yeah, we can absolutely move on, but here's the problem is that for 31, 30, 29, and 28, I've not seen any of these movies. So this is all you, big boy. So for 31, we got Wait Until Dark.
So, Wait Until Dark is not a horror movie in the conventional standards. It's like a home invasion thriller where these like you see in the episode, Alan Arkin, who like we come to love as like the grandpa in Little Miss Sunshine, and kind of like that loud mouth who throws in a curse word in a lot of like PG-13 movies. He plays like the leader of this group that's looking for this doll, and the doll is in Audrey Hepburn's house. And my parents got me to watch this movie because like my mother loved Audrey Hepburn from being in a movie called Sabrina, which they actually showed a clip of.
Right.
That was one of my mother's favorite movies, and my dad loved this movie, and so I'm actually really familiar with it. I've seen it a bunch of times, even when I was younger, and I'll always remember the. This is for those of you who have not seen it. This is a literal jump scare because the scare is Alan Arkin leaping out from out of shot, and the music like crescendos up, and it's a literal him jumping after her. She's blind, she's shutting off all the lights, so you could barely see what's happening except for one light in the coming out of the refrigerator, and she's walking towards it, and as she's walking that way, he leaps out of shot. It's fantastic. Don't go into this movie if you haven't seen it expecting You're Next, which is a great home invasion horror movie, or The Strangers. This is not that. This is a home invasion kind of robbery type movie that plays on the idea of the main character being blind. Very much like Flanagan's Hush plays on the home invasion. I'd actually be interested to know if Mike Flanagan took some of the ideas of this, where, you know, a home invasion movie where the person has a disability that plays into the kind of cat and mouse game. Obviously, in Hush, it's the main character is deaf, and you know the killer's like, "I'm coming in to get you," bang bang
Right.
bang, and
Right.
she doesn't hear a thing, and it works so well to that movie's advantage.
Yeah.
But yeah, this is a great jump scare, and it's a great, you know, a great movie overall that I think a lot of people should check out.
Right. And then the next movie, Don't Breathe, is kind of like the inverse, right? Where people break into a house and the man is blind, but he is the killer of the movie.
Yeah, I didn't love Don't Breathe, but I did appreciate Stephen Lang's incredible performance and some of the absolutely disgusting and weird twists this movie takes as it moves on towards its conclusion. And I love that they have Fede Alvarez talking about it and talking about the way people reacted, because it was funny. I was at work and I was on one of my free periods, and I'm watching this on my phone, and I have my my AirPod in, and they show the scene, and right as he's talking about it, he's like, "It was so funny. Women in the audience laughed and yelled like hooray, and men in the audience all went Bleh! And I'm watching it, and I swear to God, like a woman who I know in school walks by, and she's like, "How are you?" And I'm like, "I'm good," because it's disgusting. And for those of you who have not seen the movie, or if you've seen it and you're wondering what scene, 2 words: turkey baster. Uh, there's no other way to describe it. It is absolutely disgusting. It's a disgusting act that this villain is trying to do. And I think it was Gigi Saul Guerrero talks about like how like most of the movie you're rooting for him because you're like, yeah, fuck him up, blind guy. These people broke into your house and they're out to kill you. And then when you find out the secret that he's hiding, and the twists and the turns, which I won't get completely into because people might not have seen the movie,
Like me.
but yeah, like you, this scene at the end is both disgusting and great, and it leads to a pretty cool ending.
Yeah. I actually do want to see it at some point. I think maybe Sherry might even want to watch it too. I love thrillers in general. One type of movie that I do not like is actually number 29, and I've kind of purposely avoided this movie. And it's weird. I'm talking about number 29, Hostel. It almost feels like the talking heads in this episode didn't want to talk about Hostel. And it kind of reminds me of when they had Last House on the Left, and it seemed like they didn't want to talk about that either. Did you get that vibe too?
This, it's funny. You can tell there are some scenes where when they get to the movie, they go through it really quick. And it's like, 29, Hostel. And you're like, oh, they're going to get into Hostel. 28. And you're like, whoa, what happened? And I think one thing that they were very clear to mention, and this is where, for those people who are like, oh, I can't watch movies like this, and the phrase that pays, torture porn, this movie, and Eli Roth, sounds like a wrestling character. Eli Roth, his Hostel movies, parts 1 and 2, are a lot more, and they brought this up in the 101 moments. They're a lot more about like actual class warfare, and there's like a class conflict element, and like the horrors of capitalism in there. It's just that he uses such disgustingly graphic imagery that when you use imagery like this, very often you blur away any point that you're trying to make. And so that a lot of people see this movie and all they take from it is torture porn. It's disgusting. It should be rated NC-17, rated X. And they miss a lot of the points that the movie is actually trying to make. I actually think Hostel 2 is far superior to Hostel 1. I like Hostel, but I love Hostel 2. It has one of the most disgustingly great endings to a horror movie that you'll ever see.
Yeah.
And it was kind of weird. Like, they just kind of use as the scene in question a kind of a torturous moment where one of the main characters is tortured, and he gets drilled in the leg, and they show it on screen. I thought there were other scenes in the movie. I was kind of surprised. I think it was weird that they put this so low at number 29, because I'll tell you what I thought, and this goes into my predictions.
Yeah.
I thought they were using this to set up the next movie, which I thought was going to be Saw.
Okay.
The next movie was not Saw.
Yes.
It was, in fact, maybe the furthest thing from Saw that you could ever imagine. And it's a movie that Mike Flanagan loves so much.
Right.
It's called Lake Mungo, number 28.
Yes. And, before we dive into Lake Mungo, because honestly, I have a lot of questions about Lake Mungo, but I thought that maybe one thing we could cover in the next episode, since it's like the second to last episode of 101, is I feel like there's certain horror directors that have so far been overlooked. Like you mentioned Eli Roth, and I think there hasn't been another Eli Roth movie on the list. And maybe that makes sense, right? Because I don't know if he's the most beloved horror director. But it's interesting how certain directors have multiple films on this list, and then other directors maybe have none so far, or maybe one. Like Flanagan, obviously they're going all in on Flanagan. He's one of the talking heads. His wife is one of the talking heads. They have at least one other person from the Flanagan family in the show. He really goes all in with Lake Mungo. But what I'm thinking is maybe next time you could do your list for this episode. Maybe next time we could talk about snubs. I think that'd be kind of interesting.
Definitely.
Yeah. So Lake Mungo, honestly, even after they discussed it, I have no idea what the fuck this movie's about.
So this was one of those horror movies that I had heard a lot about. I had heard a lot of people say how great it is, how scary it is. And I saw it, and I think I had built up the expectations in my mind a little too much. I thought it was good, but it didn't blow me away. But then I did read a lot of what Flanagan had to say about it. And obviously, we take his opinion very seriously when he talks about horror. And I actually bought this. This is what I was reaching for. I bought this double disc Blu-ray. I think I think it was part of either a Kickstarter or something. It has like an incredible like book that comes with it of some of the imagery, and I haven't even gotten to look through this yet, but I bought it strictly because Mike Flanagan recommended the movie so much, and I said, okay, I didn't love it the first time, so let me have it so that I can watch it again and see it maybe through a different lens. And now that I've seen everything he's had to say about it, and I hear him say how much it influenced Haunting of Hill House, I want to definitely rewatch it. Basically, it's a very bizarre movie. It feels like you're watching like a true crime report with some found footage details, and then there's some narrative, and basically it's this woman dies. You don't really this girl dies. You don't really know how she died, but then you find out she went to this Lake Mungo, and because of that, it kind of drove her crazy a little bit. And then we end up late in the movie finding a cell phone, and we find out what was responsible for her complete 180 in emotion in the last week of her life was that she had basically an encounter with her own death.
Uh-huh.
And the inevitability of her own death drove her to, effectively become a shell of her former self, and it leads to her death later on. And like that idea of seeing your own death, Mike Flanagan talks about how that influenced number 27.
Ooh, segue. Very nice job. Yeah. The Haunting of Hill House.
Yes. So we have to mention it because I kind of, I don't want to say I went off, but I did make the point last episode how they mentioned number 46 was an episode of Twin Peaks: The Return.
Right.
And my argument is very simply, look, I'm all for including the scariest moments in horror, but you're calling the show 101 Scariest Horror Movie Moments.
Right.
So it's kind of a cheat.
Right.
And those people who have seen Twin Peaks, and I've been told by many people, including you love Twin Peaks, that episode is a movie on itself.
Right.
And that's cool. What I liked about this is they didn't say The Haunting of Hill House episode 5. The scene is really the scene in question is kind of an episode 5, but the bent neck lady herself is basically the scene.
Right.
And the bent neck lady,
yes,
is prevalent from episode 1 throughout.
Right.
And so this is more of an overarching. It's still a series, it's still
yeah.
It doesn't feel like it should be on a scariest movie moments list, but also I'm willing to cheat because it's Mike Flanagan and because this show is so fucking good.
Yeah.
And I love it so much. Actually, I don't know if I showed this last time, but I bought the double Haunting of Hill House, Haunting of Blind Manor.
Very cool.
And Netflix, I would like a physical copy of Midnight Mass, please. You could please put that out for us.
Yes.
Please. If you're going to keep putting the guy's work on your channel, the least you could do is listen to his fans and put out a physical copy of the work.
Yes.
But yeah, I mean, if you want to know what Pete and I think about The Haunting of Hill House, you can go back to the first year of our channel back in 2020, and you can listen. We covered every episode of this show. We covered every episode of Blind Manor. We covered every episode of Midnight Mass, and we are my coverage of episode 1 of the Midnight Club is up, and I'm going to be doing a review of episodes 2 through 5 very soon as I finish episode 5, and then we'll work on the second half of the show later. But yes, the bent neck lady is absolutely terrifying. And if you go to ghostgirlgreetings.com, they have an amazing bent neck lady greeting card
Yes.
that you can get for your horror inclined loved ones.
Yes. Somehow Danny just plugged like a greeting card company, like 5 episodes on our channel. He kind of plugged Mike Flanagan. There's a lot in that Hill House discussion over there.
Yep.
Flanagan is awesome, but he gets a lot of his influence from the writer of the book that inspired number 26, It Chapter 1. And I was thinking about this when I watched this episode too. When they show their little opening credits, it's very brief, but they just show little flickers of horror movies. There's multiple Stephen King adaptations in that beginning sequence.
Yep.
And the very first thing you see is Pennywise, actually, when the show starts.
So my only issue here, and I feel like I've said this many times, maybe even on this channel, to me, Tim Curry is always going to be Pennywise, and the 1990 It, while yes, the ending and the giant spider don't exactly hold up, and the first half with the kids is much better than the second half, that the effect that 1990 miniseries had on me, it can never be duplicated. Like, that was the first piece of horror that legit kept me up at night. That was the first piece of horror where when my mom was like, all right, I'm shutting the light off, as soon as the door closed, I jumped up and turned the light on. Yeah, I would have preferred the opening of the miniseries.
Right.
Because I think as great as Muschietti's It Chapter 1 is, and as great as Bill Skarsgård is, I just feel like he looks so monstrous even as a clown that I don't think any kid would be stupid enough. Whereas Tim Curry's Pennywise looked like a clown, looked like Bozo,
Right.
you know, a clown that you might see on TV.
Right.
But also, you know, the CGI teeth and the arm ripping off and the blood. Having watched the 1990, it just felt like overkill. It felt like it was showing me all the things that they couldn't show on the miniseries, and it didn't scare me as much as the miniseries. I totally get why they included this. It and It Chapter 2. I mean, I'm not saying negative. Like, they were awesome. Well, It Chapter 1 was awesome.
Right. I was gonna say.
And Muschietti and his wife are talking heads on the documentary, and most importantly, the movie's made like $1 gazillion.
Yes.
So all the credit to them for adapting it, and having read it finally, Muschietti does an amazing job of translating the book into his 2 films. Right. I just would have preferred the 1990, but you know, I totally get why this is here, and I doubt it. And I know for a fact that there will be at least 2 Stephen King adaptations in the final 23.
Oh yeah.
Yes, at least 2.
Right, exactly. I was gonna say at least 2. Yeah, and we'll talk about that once we get to your list. I really like It Chapter 1. I thought it was very well done. It Chapter 2, it's almost like it just kind of drops the ball completely, in my opinion.
I don't think it dropped the ball. I think the problem with It Chapter 2 is the same problem with the second half of the miniseries. Yeah. Is that a killer clown attacking children is scary. A killer clown chasing adults isn't. Right. And I think that's the biggest problem. And then I just think it is... Charlotte and I joke around that It Chapter 2 is still going. That's how long the movie felt. Yeah. And like, I saw It Chapter 2 with my son and a friend from work, and the movie ended in the movie theater. And instead of like a celebration of like a great cinematic achievement, it was almost like an exasperated relief of, oh, it's over. And not because it's bad. It went on for so long. It had unnecessary flashbacks. And it's just the same reason the second half of the miniseries wasn't as good as the first. Right. You know, it fell victim to the classic blunder.
Yeah, I mean,
I'm willing to bet all the money I own that you have not seen number 25.
well, I guess you've won that bet. So yeah, I've
Thank
not seen.
God.
I saw the devil. So you have?
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. This is as brutal a fucking movie as you will ever see. Like this is one of those movies where it's a revenge movie. Again, not a horror movie in the traditional sense, but an absolute horror film with one of the most sadistic serial killers you'll ever see. But even scarier than the serial killer at some points is the cop out for revenge who does some of the nastiest things you can imagine. There are long torture sequences in this movie that the guy being tortured is the clear bad guy, and you're still sitting there going, "Oh, just stop." It's fucking brutal to watch.
Right.
And the opening scene in this movie really just lets you know how fucking evil this killer is. And he just it's this gorgeous film, Korean cinema again, just an unbelievable. Uh, they've had a few Korean horror films on here already. I know Tale of Two Sisters. I'm willing to bet there's another one later, but yeah, the opening scene, this serial killer finds a woman who's stuck in her car on the side of the road. He offers her help, and then he basically just breaks into her car, beats her with a hammer, drags her bloody body away. And when you think, oh, she's dead, you find out she's still alive and she's begging for her life. And he's just like, yeah, okay, that's great. And and he just kills her. And it's just so fucking brutal. It's very similar to Zodiac, the scene that they picked from Zodiac, except this is the whole movie.
No
It's the whole goddamn movie.
Yeah. I don't know if I'll be checking that one out anytime soon, but I do kind of feel like there is this one Asian horror movie that is in your list. And I think we're going to bring that up once we get to it. We have one more to talk about now. We have number 24. I think we have just enough time to cap this one off and go into your list. 24 is the original Hellraiser, directed by Clive Barker. And you have seen the remake now, right?
Not yet. Not yet.
Oh, okay. I thought you tweeted, maybe it's like you didn't tweet this, but I thought you tweeted something about like this is the third of a trilogy about grief.
That was I think that was Phil Nobile Jr. Who works for Fangoria and is also very prominent on Shudder in a lot of their documentaries. He's an executive producer on Queer for Fear. He's an executive producer on Horror Noir. I met him at conventions. He's a really cool guy. He tweeted that the new Hellraiser, instead of being like the start of a franchise, is part of like an unspoken David Bruckner like trilogy about grief and guilt with The Ritual and The Night House. We both talked about The Night House a lot. It was on this list. We love it. But the Ritual is amazing. It's on Netflix. More people should check it out. And I retweeted him, and my response was Bruckner is a horror filmmaker that should be listed alongside a lot of the modern geniuses that people tend when they say, "Oh, horror is in great hands," and they always list the big three. I always mention Jordan Peele, Robert Eggers, and Ari Aster,
right?
As like the three, like the three-headed monster of new horror. And like to me, Bruckner should be right up on that list.
Yeah.
Because he's made, I haven't seen a new Hellraiser. Have you finished it?
Yeah. Oh yeah.
And you liked it?
I did. For me, there was this writer, Daniel Barnett, and he was like, "Does anyone want to watch Hellraiser and be like movie watching buddies?" And I watched like half of it, but then I had to go be with Sherry for a little bit, and so I finished it like the next night. But it was really cool, like writing with this writer who writes his own horror books. He's written this Nightmare Land series, and he had some really great feedback about the new Hellraiser. But it made me really intrigued about the Hellbound Heart, which Hellraiser is based upon. And like the Hellraiser that was made by Bruckner that just came out, is very different from this Hellraiser that they're talking about in this episode. So it makes me wonder, like, well, what is the Hellbound Heart actually like? And I know that like Clive Barker directed this Hellraiser, so it's like, is the story more like that one, or is it more like Bruckner's? It's weird. I hand to God, here's a little embarrassing thing. I actually have not seen the original Hellraiser, so
Wow.
I know. Even Edgar Wright even says, like, he's like, I think every horror movie fan has seen Hellraiser, right? He said that. I'm like, I
Well,
guess
I
I'm
mean,
not a horror.
even if you've never seen the whole 90-minute movie,
I know what
you've
happens.
seen parts. You've seen Doug Bradley in the
Right.
makeup. You've seen the
Right.
Cenobites. You probably even saw the scene that they put up there, because
Right.
it's an infamous moment at the end when the villain of the movie, who is not Pinhead or the Cenobites, it's Frank, Uncle Frank. When he gets discovered by the Cenobites, and he gets basically, he's being eviscerated with the chains. And I'm pretty sure the story of this is that Andrew Robinson, the actor, ad-libbed this line.
Oh, okay.
And I'm not sure if it was in the original script, but he turns around and with this look of glee, or as Edgar Wright, not David Wright, he's a baseball player. Edgar Wright said he probably had an erection, the character. Jesus wept. One of the great, like, sarcastic fuck you lines in a horror movie ever. Right as he's about to be torn apart and murdered again by these, like, hell demons. And yeah, I think it's great that they ended with that, because it's just furthering that I need to go and watch the new Hellraiser on Hulu.
Yes.
Yeah.
And when you're ready to talk about it, let's go meet up for like a fifth time this week and talk about horror.
Sure.
You know?
Anytime.
So we got less than 10 minutes to go through your countdown. What I think we should do is this. I think you should literally just list the movies, and like maybe I'll do a real reaction of like, ooh, okay. But like that's it, because we got like 8 minutes now.
I basically tried to think, obviously, there are some that must be on this list. There's just musts.
Yeah.
That are going to be very obvious.
Okay.
But then I tried to think super classic, like early horror films that they never talked about yet. And then also more modern horror films. I also tried to pull out some foreign horror films. So I'll throw out the foreign horror films right away.
Let's do it.
Martyrs, the King of French Extremis, and the Korean horror film, I'm sure you could probably guess, is Train to Busan. Oh, what were you thinking?
I thought Audition.
Audition was on the list already, wasn't it?
I don't think so.
Well then, yeah, you could throw that one on too. I thought Audition was on the list much earlier, but
I don't think it was.
Oh, all right. Well then, yes. Train to Busan, to me, is the greatest zombie movie ever made. And I also figured, okay, they'll pair that up with the original Night of the Living Dead, which has not been on the list yet. Dawn has, but not the original Night.
Smart.
Thinking about modern horror directors, James Wan was covered with The Conjuring. I think they're going to come back to him 2 more times. I put the original Insidious.
Whoa, okay.
The movie that legitimately broke Charlotte to the point where she needed a new bed for her to go back to sleep.
Wow.
And I mentioned they have to put the ending of Saw on this list, or the bear trap from Saw. That I think Saw has earned its right to be on this list.
Totally agree.
John Carpenter hasn't been on this list nearly enough. I think we're getting the obvious ones, The Thing and Halloween. I think those go without saying.
Yes.
We mentioned Stephen King. I know we're getting The Shining and Carrie are definitely going to be in the top 20.
Yes.
Here's one that I would absolutely love to see. The name of this countdown is Scariest Horror Movie Moments. If you ask most people what the greatest jump scare in horror movie history is, they're going to say The Exorcist 3. I want Exorcist 3 in this list because that is legit one of the greatest jump scares ever. Ever.
Right.
And people know it even without having seen Exorcist 3.
Right.
Speaking of that, The Exorcist, maybe even number 1, and it could be any scene from the goddamn movie. What else did I have here? Oh, here's one that I just threw in there. A horror movie that I love that scared the shit out of me. The
Yeah.
Others with Nicole Kidman.
Oh, yeah.
I thought An Outside Chance, kind of like a Changeling-esque ghost story. One of our favorite movies, Event Horizon, another one that people think of in terms of horror, just scary moments.
Yes. Good one.
Also, rumor is In Space, No One Can Hear You Scream. Obviously, Alien is going to be on there.
Yes.
Toby Hooper, 2-for-1 deal, Poltergeist and Texas Chainsaw, of course. I figure both of those will be on the list.
Yeah. Kid with the Clown.
Going all the way back.
Yeah.
I'm thinking either Freaks, Todd Browning's Freaks.
Absolutely. Yes. That'll be on there.
Google Gobble, One of Us.
One of Us, yes. Yeah.
And also, if they really want to go old, super old, they can go to like the Cabinet of Dr. Caligari.
Oh,
I don't know how far back they're going to go, but we'll see.
Yeah.
We've mentioned it before. Hereditary, I think, is going to be very high on the list. I mean, it's already, I think it's going to be in the top 23, hoping it's closer to the top 10, but we'll see.
Yes.
The Omen, of course, I think is going to be there.
Yeah.
And I think of the ones that I wrote down, the only one I haven't mentioned yet is Jaws. And
movie.
Yeah. I don't know if they'll go with the Ben Gardner head popping out of the boat scene or the opening scene with the first shark attack or the jump scare of the shark popping up, and which leads to we're going to need a bigger boat. So, yeah. I think I listed 21 movies. Oh, one more, and Charlotte and I just finished watching it. The Descent. Neil Marshall's The Descent.
Yes.
Which the scariest moment in a movie full of monsters is just the suffocating claustrophobia of some of the scenes of them crawling through these caverns. Charlotte was freaking out. So yeah.
What about? Wait, you didn't say Scream.
Fuck me, I didn't say Scream. Hold on.
Yeah. So I think that to add to your list, I think Audition will be on there. It'll be The Guy in the Bag, and then Scream.
Well, that would give us, I think that's 23 or 24 movies. So So I think what we should do is
Psycho.
Fuck, Psycho's not on here yet. Shit.
Yeah.
Oh man. All right. Well, that might be the end of the others. We'll see. But let's see how many of these we get right. Let's see. It's good that you threw in Psycho. I completely. You know why? Because they mentioned Psycho when they did Peeping Tom. They mention it, but they don't go into it. So
yeah. That's quite a list you have there. I think you're on the money for most of them. I think there'll probably be a couple. Here's the last question. We have 2 minutes left. Are we done with Flanagan at this point?
I'm gonna go with yes. I think. I don't think they would put any of his other movies. I think they hit on all of his. I mean, unless there's something from Bly Manor or Midnight Mass, but I can't see those being in the top 20. I think Hill House is considered to be his scariest of his Netflix shows.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I think he's done, but I think he had an amazing showing. Dr. Sleep, Gerald's Game, and Haunting of Hill House, 3 out of 100 for a guy whose entire career has been effectively the last, decade and a half?
Yeah.
Yeah. He certainly came across very well in this. Yes. And I hope to see him and Kate Siegel and Alex Iso and the rest of the Flana family in the next couple episodes as Talking Heads again.
Yes. And these Talking Heads will be back next week then to talk about 101 Scariest Movie Moments, Episode 7. See y'all next week.